First of all, thanks to everyone for coming this morning. 26 is a pretty good number, and maybe we'll get a few more along the way. Like all churches, a few people turn up late to our services, so we just have to put up with that. I can empathise with you, gentlemen, on that. So just a couple of admin points, really. We are recording this morning, so if you don't want to be seen, then turn off your video. You'll find your video button at the bottom of your PC screen. If you're on an iPad, I think it might be at the top, and you won't see it unless you touch the screen gently. Okay, so that's the first thing. If you need to adjust your sound, you know how to do that. The little microphone icon, which is going to be either at the bottom or the top, will allow you to do that. And just one final thing, we're in a slightly unusual position at the moment of being blessed with 3 speakers, and we have decided to take questions at the end. So if you could save your questions up to the end of the speakers' presentations, that would be good. Now, I'd like to get proceedings underway and ask Father Tony to say a blessing for us.
Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless us as we gather together this morning, at least online, to reflect on experiences of these last months. Bless us, bless our families, all those we care for, the people whom we try to serve. We ask this and all our prayers through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you. Now, I did actually say that Richard had been reading my script, and it's curiouser and curiouser, because what I had actually wrote down here about 15 minutes ago is that in a world where everything seems to be constantly changing, not necessarily for the better, I'm going to invite Colin to tell us a couple of jokes to cheer us on our way. So let's hope that that's what happens. And I will just put Colin in the spotlight. I see the parrot is with you again this morning, Colin.
Yeah, my faithful friend is there watching over me.
Okay, so take it away, Colin.
Okay, good morning, gentlemen. Just in passing, a palindromic date since our last meeting. The numbers from the 12th of February, 1202 2021. And last year, on the 2nd of February, it was 0202 2020. Anyway, just in passing.
Okay.
Well, as today's theme is about the pandemic, I thought maybe a few jokes related to that might be relevant. First of all, a joke with a nod to William Shakespeare. What's the difference between COVID-19 and Romeo and Juliet? What's the difference between COVID-19 and Romeo and Juliet?
Oh, if only Peter Warren was here, he'd know that one. Go on, Colin, tell us the answer, please.
Well, one's the coronavirus and the other is a Verona crisis.
Boom, boom.
Oh, good. You're not all muted. I could hear a few groans.
I think you've woken a few people up.
That was wonderful, wonderful. Let's see what happens with the next one. What do you tell yourself when you wake up late for work and realise you have a fever? What do you tell yourself when you wake up late for work and realise you have a fever?
Oh, please enlighten us.
Self-isolate.
Right. Okay.
I'm busy
Another
trying to
good
mute.
groan. That was wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, I'm on a roll now. Let's see if we can get another groan, shall we?
Just roll a bit quicker then, please.
Okay, then.
Thanks.
What type of jokes are allowed during quarantine? What type of jokes are allowed during quarantine?
I know answers shouldn't be allowed.
Down out. Down out. Well, the
Give us a
type of
clue.
right, the type of jokes that are allowed during quarantine are inside jokes.
Oh dear.
Anyway, finally, you'll
Really?
probably guess this one because my second daughter did when I tried it on her yesterday. What is the situation when there are so many coronavirus jokes out there? What is the situation when there are so many coronavirus jokes out there?
Comic.
Yes.
Well, it's a pandemic.
Well, I think that
Save the best
brings us
till
to a
last.
nice conclusion. Thank you for that, Colin. And indeed, as we said before, some things never change.
Maybe next time I'll use a parrot. Yeah.
Okay. Now, we are blessed with 3 speakers this morning. And our first speaker is Richard. So, seems like there's no point in doing introductions to the speakers in this meeting because we know them all. So I'm just going to let you get on with it, Richard. I'll get out your way.
Thank you, friends. It's lovely to be together. We're taking 5 minutes each and then going to take some questions. And I sense that the questions will bring out a lot of the things that Tony, Andrew and I would like to say. So to begin with, reflections on COVID. Firstly, at the risk of sounding trite, is anyone else dreaming of people in boxes now? When I dream of people, I just see you all in little boxes. That's one reflection. Second reflection, and I mean this in the most respectful way to the Lord, but I've come up with a new beatitude to add to the ones that Jesus gave onto the Sermon on the Mount. The new one is this: blessed are the flexible. And I think that's true of all of us in every circumstance, every walk of life. You know, we've had to learn to be flexible in so many ways, and that's generated, emotions, both positive and negative. But thirdly, in the short time that I got available, I just want to talk about, we're in the season of Lent. It's a time of personal examination, of drawing close to Jesus, and as a church, walking more intentionally with him to grow in his love as we look forward to celebrating Easter Sunday. Or perhaps inspired by that, as I've been thinking and praying and reflecting on the last 11 months. It's 11 months, fellas, isn't it? We're coming up to an anniversary of that. I've come up with one word, which for me sort of reflects on the pandemic, and it's this. I think, as I reflect on it, that God, who is love and sovereign, and who is with us and for us, is reshaping. At every level, it is a global reshaping. It is a national reshaping. It is a reshaping of every person, of every community in every way. But I want to just reflect on that picture very briefly in the few minutes I have. Look what is being shaped. The clay is being shaped. That takes us to the book of Jeremiah. I would suggest to us that what God is doing with us is that he is the potter, we are the clay. Notice the care of those hands. Notice the skill of those hands. And we recognize and acknowledge the love and the commitment and the expertise of the potter to shape something beautiful. And if any of you have had a go at pottery, as I have once or twice, sometimes you have to start again to get something beautiful. And I have a sense at every level that what God is doing here is reshaping. I've experienced that personally. My family situation has been reshaped in painful ways. I have been challenged to think, what is my identity? What is it to be a human, let alone to be a Christian, let alone to be part of a church and a leader of a church? The pandemic has forced every person to, if they want to, reshape their identity. What is it to be human? We've lost so many of our freedoms. Our routines have had to change. We've been challenged to think of the most deep things. We've been rendered powerless. And so it's been an opportunity for us to reshape our identity. It's given us an appreciation, perhaps, of things that we may have forgotten about. The importance of creation, the importance of the small things in life. Think for a moment of touch. There are members of our church who have not touched a human being for 11 months. The importance of touch, the importance of relationship, the importance of love, all of those things have been reshaped. Not just our home lives and our church lives have been reshaped, and we can talk about that in a moment, as we and you have all had to adjust to share God's love and to be people of God's love. But work has been fundamentally changed. School has been fundamentally changed. And the church has been fundamentally changed. I'm going to share things now that are not secret, but things you may not be aware of. Parishes in the Church of England are bankrupt. The Church of England is being forced to address its structures and processes and organizations in a way that it's never had to do before. Friends of mine are being made redundant as vicars. There is a global reshaping, and that's going into the very fabric of church, and that's affecting the churches that the three of us are part of, to see how can we be in the potter's hands and to be people who give love, people who give hope, and then rest in Christ. But I have ultimate confidence in the potter, and I've just, with you, acknowledged that God is shaping us to be something even more beautiful, not for our sake, but for his sake. And that leads us to be adapting every day to how we share God's love in practical ways, how we engage with people, and how we try and sort of bless people with God's love. There's more I'm sure you want to ask me, but I want to honor the time. So it's a time of reshaping at every level.
Thank you, Richard. That was great. Now, can I ask you just quickly? That's it. I was going to just ask you to stop your screen share. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to invite Andrew now to, if I can do this. Now, there's another little trick coming up.
Hi, Bill.
Two people in the spotlight now, so you've got to behave now, Richard, while Andrew's here, because your spotlight's still on you. Okay. Good morning, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Bill. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak briefly this morning at the men's breakfast gathering. I think that over the last 11 months, we've had to learn to get used to unprecedented levels of usage of the word unprecedented. In a college newsletter that I received from the college where I did my theological training, the principal spoke recently in the newsletter of a passage from the book of James in the New Testament, James chapter 4, verse 14. James, the writer, says, "You do not even know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." I thought the comment was interesting because the time of coronavirus has firstly affected our sense of ourselves, our identity, and we're kidding ourselves as human beings if we think we are in control. The pandemic has been a wake-up call to us, and it's reminded us to confront our own mortality. It's taught us many things about ourselves, things that we have had to learn to adjust to. We'd never have wished for this pandemic to fall upon us, but we are becoming, in and through it, ever more dependent upon God. It's been a time of testing and a time of purifying us. As Richard has already said, it's taught us to appreciate small blessings and to become more mindful of nature and our local environment, and to be kinder to neighbours over the street and across the road from us. It's enabled us to have a broader sense of the notion of we. We are all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. It's forced me and it's forced us all to slow down, to become more attentive to our surroundings and environment. It's taught us the importance of patience because we cannot control the situation. And it's taught me not to take things for granted. There are many, many other things that this time of coronavirus has taught us about ourselves, but let's also think about what it has taught us about church, and then finally what it has also taught us about God. There was a story doing the rounds during the summer last year. Satan says to God, I've finally managed to close down all your churches. God replies to Satan, on the contrary, I've now opened up a church in so many homes. And the little story reminds us that God is not imprisoned in church buildings. God lives among his people, and that all space is sacred space. We believe that we are a church without walls to some extent. We don't necessarily need bricks and mortar to be God's people. We as God's people are the living stones, and we are God's spiritual houses, it says in 1 Peter chapter 2. Last year I was preaching mainly through the book of Acts, and it struck me that the early church not only went to the temple building to worship regularly, but they also frequently met in each other's homes. And the disciples and the apostles were light on their feet. They weren't fixed to just one location. And it was a reminder to me that our church community needs to be light on its feet. It must not get rigid and rooted in just one spot. Lockdown has also necessitated use of modern technology, which comes with a lot of frustration when technology doesn't work. But the wonders of modern technology have also enabled us to meet online. I quickly had to learn some basic video editing skills and get used to preaching to a mobile phone camera. But I was told that the camera and the screen is not a barrier, but it's a conduit. It's not an obstruction, it's an opportunity. When we gather in our church buildings, we rely on technology, for example, microphones and amplifiers. And during lockdown, it's been up to the individual and for homes to provide the technology, to provide the Wi-Fi, the devices, and the screens. The message remains the same. Christ is with us. Christ died and rose again, but the medium of the message has had to adapt. We still rely on sound waves impacting our eardrums, but just not in such close proximity to each other. We've had many restrictions placed upon us, rightly so, but there is no restriction on worship. There is no lockdown on prayer. There is no restriction on mission. When we were able to reconvene in our building in September last year, one of our church members said, Christians are happier when we're together. Another one said, it's like coming home. So although we were able to worship online, it still is a poor substitute to actually being in close proximity in a place of worship together. Again, we find ourselves closed, but hopefully with infections decreasing and with more and more people receiving the vaccine, we will be able to open our doors again in the not too distant future. So I've thought briefly about ourselves in the context of coronavirus. I've thought briefly about the church in the context of coronavirus. Thirdly and finally, what has this pandemic taught us about God? Skeptics will say God doesn't care. Skeptics will ask, why didn't God prevent the death of over 2.4 million preventable COVID deaths worldwide? The Christian response is to say that our ways are not God's ways, and that God is still very much sovereign and in control. We believe in God's ultimate authority in the midst of suffering and pain. He didn't directly ordain this pandemic, and I think it's too simplistic to say it is just his judgment. And even if it were part of his judgment, there would still be his loving intent behind it. In some sense, God has allowed this pandemic and will somehow weave it into his salvation plans, because we believe in a God who specializes in making a way where and when there seems to be no future way. Problems give us a chance for God's solutions to be found. It was interesting to read a little bit about the smallpox pandemic when it hit Boston, Massachusetts in 1721. There was a fatality rate in 1721 of 30%. And the conquest of the smallpox virus began when two Puritan church pastors, Cotton Mather and Benjamin Coleman, investigated whether God had provided a solution for the virus in nature. Some Puritans began experimenting with inoculations. The official Centers for Disease Control and Prevention account of the discovery of the smallpox inoculation attributes it to the English physician Edward Jenner, who lived from 1749 to 1823, without even mentioning the pioneering work of the Puritan pastors 2 generations earlier.
Never heard of that one.
Those 2 Puritan pastors are quoted as saying, "He that has fixed his own counsel, how long we shall live, has also determined that by such and such means our lives shall be continued to that period of time." So skeptics may well say that science has saved us through the rollout of the vaccine program.
A long 5 minutes.
The Christian response is to say that God has built healing into his creation, and that science is the appropriate harnessing of God's creation to bring healing to our bodies. We should therefore be glad that God gives the skills and the knowledge required to provide the right mixture of chemicals being injected to so many thousands and millions of arms currently. God provides in so many ways. And I finish with a quote from Corrie ten Boom. "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God."
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. That was really, really uplifting. That was lovely. Father Tony, let me see if I can find you. I'm going to add you to the... Oh, I've got the wrong person. Sorry, Alan.
Is Derek there?
Unfortunately, I'm going up and down a list looking for people, and if the list moves, I kind of spotlight the wrong person. There we are. Father Tony, good morning.
Good morning.
You're a little faint, Father. Could you...
I'm not on screen yet. I can't see it.
Okay.
Spotlight is on, is it?
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, okay then. Well,
Can now.
look at you, Bill. So that's fascinating. Disconcerting. Well, I think I want to certainly echo what Richard and Andrew have both said. One thing, in fact, to mention first of all, what we've learned from this experience, the extraordinary increase in knowledge of technology. And there are several practical lessons we've all learned. This time last year, I didn't know what Zoom was. Well, I know now. I think we see opportunities for growth and development in our communities by use of technology. For example, prayer groups and study groups have attracted new members who we previously hadn't reached. And clearly, in our community, we've got people who are skilled in communications and technology. And I think we're going to find new ways. We have found new ways, and we're on finding ways to use technology. Another question I think I want to ask is what lessons have we learned as parishes, as communities? During the past year, I suppose, many of our parish activities have been cancelled or reduced to Zoom encounters. And that leads me to ask the question, how much of what we normally do is necessary? What structures in our parishes have proved their worth during these lockdown months? Which ones could be dispensed with? In the last half century or so, the churches have loved committees at national and local levels. Committees have been established with careless abandon. And how many of them actually advance the gospel? And if they don't serve a useful purpose, now's the time to get rid of them. Now, I think it's important for us to think about the structures, that those that have worked and those that haven't. they get a level of practical care for others. Christians have given a wonderful witness to Christ's command to love our neighbours. Parishes and Christian groups have joined with others in reaching out to those in need. But in terms of the life of our parishes, much has stopped, and we have to ask, what do we want to put back as we come out of lockdown? Certainly not everything as it was before, I think. And one other point to make, perhaps, Pope Francis has been concerned all through the COVID crisis to ask us to think about the challenge COVID-19 represents for the world community. He thinks that worldwide pandemic has shown up the weaknesses of the world order. He says that fraternity is the true cure for the pandemic and many evils have afflicted us. And in his recent writings, urging society to rethink so much that goes on. For example, the present issue of getting vaccines to poorer countries. The point being made that until everyone is free, no one's really free. And the need to rethink the way our world society is organized and governed. So I think for us as Christians to be part of that discussion too, contributing to the discussion about how the world moves forward. And in doing so, I think so I'm a little bit distracted by this camera business today, to think about how we make an impact as Christians in society, but also how our own communities are to develop to meet the needs of a post-COVID world. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Father. So at this stage, I'd like to open the floor up for questions. So I'm going to take the Reverend Gentleman out of the from the spotlight, and I'm going to go back into gallery view so I can see everybody. And if anybody wants to raise a question, now is the time to raise your hand, either metaphorically or technically. Okay, so do we have any? Is that, oh, okay. Do we have any hands? Ah, I see Teddy is raising a hand. Teddy, what's your question?
Yes. Thank you, Bill. I think it was Richard said that the economic effects of the pandemic are pretty severe in terms of the income of parishes and the church generally, and that this, by implication, will involve the closure of some parishes and the creation of larger parishes, which in itself is fine. It gives a bigger financial basis on which to carry on going, and it also enables people perhaps to employ other people, employ lay people to help. But in those circumstances, the bigger the parish, how do you keep small communities going? This is the problem, isn't it?
Yes, and the question is really aimed at Richard, is it?
It's aimed at Richard, but other comments welcome.
Okay, Richard, you'd like to go first crack at it then?
Well, thank you, Teddy, for asking the question. I do value it. I think the first thing I want to say is that we look to the Lord and the Lord will provide. And I am a parish priest, in a denomination, and I trust that the leadership, of the denomination of which I'm a part continues to do that, and the Lord will then guide what comes out of it. Let me answer it this way. I think at the heart of our faith is the fact that we love God through Jesus Christ and the power of the Spirit. And so God is community. I absolutely endorse what you say, that the Trinity is community, faith is community, and we find that faith together. So community is at the heart of any church. And so I believe that for any church, whether it's a church of 6 or 60 or 600, is that one hopes and prays that there are small groups. And part of the role that I, with Andrew and Tony, have enabling those small groups to meet for friendship, for fellowship, for prayer, for Bible study, for mission. And that's what we see in Scripture, don't we? The church met in small groups. Andrew referred to it. And I think part of my encouragement and hopes as we go through this is giving a reawakening of the power of small groups, Teddy. I can think of my church. I'm so grateful for how many people are meeting together and meeting by Zoom or going for walks when they could. So I think one of the benefits of the pandemic is force people to re-examine things. It's encouraged so many to commit to a small group, and there's been a greater sense of vulnerability and openness and support in, I believe, many of them, and it's strengthened that. So in answer to your question, I pray that the God by his Spirit will continue to develop small groups. How that works in terms of ministry, well, we shall see as my denomination and others work through. But I have been committed to, and still am, sort of that we're a church of small groups within one family, and how small groups can function complementary.
Okay. Richard and Father Tony, would you like to add anything to that? Okay, well, let's move on then. Next.
Can I ask a question,
Mike.
Bill? This is really referring to 2 points that were made by Andrew and Father Tony. Andrew, you said that the word pandemic, okay, we're talking about pandemic, all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. Mm. And then Father Tony referred to the Pope talking about the way society is structured. And one of the dangers is that we become focused out of this. We become focused upon the problems that the church has within its structure. And I fully acknowledge the problems that you were talking about, Richard, in terms of the, the financial burden on the parishes and what have you. But actually what this pandemic has shown up more strongly than anything else is the various unfairnesses and distributions of society, the breaking up of various chunks. We even do it systematically by saying, by the way the vaccines have been distributed, that we go in sort of sections. So I know, it all seems fair, but basically what we're doing is we're segmenting our society into, a massive fragmentation, where we really ought to be looking at the structures of society and changing those fundamentally. So the question I have is the church capable, and I mean the wide Christian church, capable of taking its focus off the problems that it faces in its own structure and galvanizing us all to put pressure on the lawmakers, the people who run society, not just politicians, but big companies, etc., to make society a damn sight fairer than this pandemic has shown it actually is?
Okay, who would like to take that one on? Father Tony, thank you.
Obviously the camera won't look at me. So very disconcerting. For some reason, the Zoom doesn't, all I'm doing is look at somebody else. But the question, I think the answer, it must do that. It must do what Mike suggested. And in fact, by involving ourselves more completely in the wider community, we will grow ourselves. The real danger is precisely, I think, that we can become very introspective, too concerned about our own structures and not reaching out. So often it's when you reach out to others that you meet the people you're working with. Again, recently there was a document put out by the World Council of Churches and the Vatican based on the story of the Good Samaritan, and making the point that in fact we all have to become the Good Samaritan. And that means working with people we don't know, different faiths, different backgrounds. By working together for the good, we get to know each other better and we grow together. So in fact, working outside is a positive source of growth for the church. I look at my screen, says Fred all the time. I don't know what it's about.
Okay.
Mike, if I can just reply just before Andrew, I fully agree with you. One of the things that the pandemic is exacerbated the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. I even know in the parish of Ashtead that some people are blessed to have, more than one computer in their house. I know there are people in Ashtead who are struggling, who only have one computer but have more than one child, and then parents wanting to work and struggling to work from home as well as homeschool. So it is in our community, it's in our world, and we're sick. My fear of the pandemic is it's exacerbating the gulf between those who are able and those who are less able. So how do we do that? Well, at a local level, as Tony said, we as Christians, we as the church together, offering love and support. I'm humbled by the generosity of our community to the food bank. St. George's happens to be by a location, the connection point, which is what we've set up. So that's another sign of love. I can only speak of my church, and I'm sure it's true of Ashtead Baptist and St. Michael's, how we're offering practical help to bless people in other ways. There are a number of things I could say. But now to answer your question, that now is, and other churches are doing what we're all doing. And that's now being fed up, certainly to the leadership of the denomination that I'm part of. And to conclude, I am very encouraged by the leadership that some of the bishops of the Church of England are giving. One positive of being in the national church is that there are representatives in the House of Lords. And they are speaking out of this, and they're gaining, I believe, an audience which perhaps they've not had before because of the nature of the crisis, that they're being involved. And finally, at the start of the crisis, the denominations and the faith groups of our nation came together as a faith council and asked to meet with the government. And they meet regularly with the Under Secretary, I forget which one. It's being chaired by Sarah Mullally, who's the Bishop of London, who's a former chief nurse on behalf of the Archbishop. She was appointed with the people of, I think, the different denominations. And I understand that they are meeting regularly with the government. Whether the government is listening is another matter, but to talk of those things. But certainly lobbying is taking place outside of that, Mike. And I think one of the learnings has got to be that we as a church, individually, locally, nationally, and internationally, have got to be increasingly active.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
If I might just add that that there's an interesting website that I've just been sent a link for in the last few days. It's www.covidfreeworld.org.uk, and it's a petition to try and enable the UK government to make the COVID programme of the vaccination a more equitable resource for the whole world.
I will send that link out in the afterwards.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Do we have another question? Let me just have a quick scan and see if anyone's raising their hands. Okay, well, I have a question. I just wonder from the other side of the altar what it's like running a service over the internet. What you feel about it, what it's helped us to achieve, and what its drawbacks are. So I don't mind who takes that one on. Father Tony, thank you.
I find it's just an enhancement, because I find it doesn't. I don't consciously. I don't feel awkward because the camera's there. But it's good to know sometimes you've got so many people. We had a funeral mass recently where we had about 25 people present, but 120 views. People in Ireland and elsewhere, people couldn't come to that funeral. So you do have a sense. Just an example I took. Recently, one Saturday night, our evening mass, I for some reason thought the camera wasn't working properly. And I mentioned this at the end of mass. Before I got back into the presbytery, I had on my mobile phone a message came from Pakistan, showing me it was broadcast as I thought it wasn't. Pakistan, before I got it from Ashtead. And that sense of being part of a worldwide community, people watching things. Also, it helps, I think, it reminds us, I think, of that we are praying together. And I try and make a point every week at Mass of mentioning those who are taking part online. It's been very encouraging that way.
Thank you. Any more comments on that, gentlemen?
If I can take it, I've been on a journey with all of this, and I'll speak about some of my experiences and some of my anxieties and worries about all of this. I agree with Tony. We've been forced to, and I've been delighted that we've been able to develop this opportunity, as Andrew has said, to be the church in every home. That's great. Personally, I felt a real sort of pressure to ensure that we did it. I was very conscious of my, lack of skills in those areas. So that was, a real sort of leadership challenge for us all, of mobilizing people. And then one of the things I said right at the start is, we need to offer what we can, but we're not the BBC. But a temptation sort of came, and I noticed it in myself, to do things as well as we could for the Lord, which is what we want. And credit to everybody involved in the community that I'm part of. And that became really good. Now, we started doing it by a recorded thing, and that was hugely labor intensive. The hours that it took of several people was a huge impact. So that took away from, or added to, the pastoral ministry that we all have, because you couldn't visit listening the number of telephone calls and the issues that raises. Despite being a preacher, there's something about preaching on your own in your front room, which is not very nice. I much prefer, being with people in God's presence, whilst I'm in God's presence and trust people are watching. To preach to a camera is very different. One has learned along the way. It's forced me to be shorter, which I think my parish would say is a good thing, and hopefully better. In the early days, because we was all being recorded and not having the skills I was doing retake after retake, and it was taking hours to get a 12-minute talk down. And then you put it all together and it goes out, and praise be God. But you lose that spontaneity, you lose that sense of connection with what's going on. And I think as time moved on, it became for all of us, you're watching a screen, and how you differentiate watching a church service from being a television program. And there's a whole conversation we have around all of that, with the changes that we've tried to make to going live. I much prefer being live. I think it's important that wherever possible, we broadcast if we can from the church, which is what we're trying to do as the regulations allow. In the early days, we were not allowed to do that in the Church of England, and that feels better. So I'm more at ease with it now. I'm enjoying the technology. We're experimenting doing interactive things, which is good. I have a concern finally for the future, is the fact that I know people fast forward us. That's fine. Okay, I'm not proud about all of that. But how do we now curate and pastor us as a flock back into worship? We're going to be a hybrid church. There will be online, there'll be in person, but there is still something special about coming together as God's people in one place. And how do we pastor and help people to come back into that, rather than thinking I can be at home and watch the service when I want, which is great, but there's something theological there that I want to engage with.
Okay. Andrew, any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would really echo and agree with what Richard has said there. I think it's good to be able to use the technology available to us, despite its frustrations. As Richard has said, I completely agree with him. There's nothing quite like meeting together in a place of worship. Everything else is a poor substitute. Everything else is like instant coffee. It's not the real thing.
Nicely put. Nicely put.
Sorry,
go ahead.
We might need to live with a blended approach for a while, having remote services, pre-recorded services, online services, but hopefully there will come a day when people build up their confidence again to be a gathered community in a place of worship.
Thank you. Just on this subject of the technology, some while ago, near the beginning of the first lockdown, I got a phone call from the parish secretary, Alison, and she said, Father Tony's just posted a video on Facebook group. And now she was close to panic, and the funny thing was that she and I had been talking about this for some days and trying to figure out how to do it so that we could then help Father Tony. He had actually phoned up a mate of his and worked it out for himself. So, you know,
Well done. Well
well
done.
done, Father Tony.
Yeah.
I was seriously impressed. I still am, but I was seriously impressed at the time.
Bill,
Okay.
can I ask a question of others? Is the fact that I'm really missing singing as well as coming together. There's something about raising our voices together, and that's something we've not been able to do at all,
Yeah.
have we? Really? Does anybody else resonate with that?
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easter Sunday not singing Hallelujah is very, very strange.
Yes, it is. It is strange. It is a strange situation.
On the plus side, I am rather looking forward to the clerical BAFTA awards.
What worries me are the outtakes.
Yeah.
Yes, it'll be all right on the night.
be a good
The
program.
blooper reel.
Don't worry. Okay, let me just have a quick scan and see if we've got any more questions coming in. Ah, Malcolm. I just need to, if you can just unmute
I
yourself.
can unmute, can't I?
There we go.
Here we go. Thanks. Thanks, Bill. I was thinking about the online presence, this sort of blended, the hybrid sort of mix that we're likely to end up with. Do our speakers think there's any truth in the rumours, as it were, that we are reaching out to people through the online access, to people who would not have entered our church buildings at all, or not in the recent past, certainly, and any ideas on how we continue to minister to those people, you know, without necessarily expecting them to walk through the door straight away, just because it suits us. Thank you.
Again, I think the numbers, and we can't do this, but if you have a live stream service, certain some of the cathedrals have found this, that numbers watching are huge. And many of those people are people who wouldn't normally come. It's not either or. I completely agree with Richard and Andrew that you can't replace a real gathered community with anything online. It's the difference between a virtual hug is no hug at all. And you have to have that, the real, in an incarnational church, we have to be together. But for those people who can't come, the sick and the housebound, who value it immensely, also those who say, feel more comfortable tuning in at home than walking through the door of a building. And it's a challenge to us, how do we reach out to them, even when this is all over? Because people are certainly coming who wouldn't normally come, in my experience. Not just here, but generally.
Malcolm, I do agree with what you said. I do believe from the context of St. Giles and St. George's that is true. How do I know that? Because as the regulations allow, we've tried to put things on physically that people can be invited to. So in our context, there was something called Journey to the Stable we did in the week before Christmas. During half term, we've done something called the Heart Trail, where you could go around through Ashtead following some hearts. Now, you've had to log on through the church website to find information or book on those things. So just from those two events as examples, I know the people that have logged on, we've compared those lists to the list that we have, and we know that they're not, how can I put it, people on the electoral roll or part of the church. As of when I and other members of a church have spoken with those people when they've come through the events, it's come about that they've been watching. So you started to have that conversation. So people are coming, Malcolm. We do know that. And what we're looking now is, we're starting to prayerfully plan in the church that I pastor, is what that will look like. So what that will look like is there will be an online offering, which will be catered for them. We have built a little television studio at St. George's. We're going to be using that. I'm looking like a 25-minute offering live, which can be repeated, aimed for those who don't come to church, those who haven't got a Christian faith. It is packaged. Frankly, it's a television program for that constituency, and then with appropriate links into other parts of the ministry.
Okay. Okay. Any more thoughts on that topic? I'd like to just raise one thing that has bothered me through the pandemic, which is we have at St Michael's, and I'm sure there's the same thing in the two other churches, a care rota, and the carers on the care rota go round and they visit and minister to the sick and the elderly and the poor and what have you. And almost from the first lockdown, one of the problems that we came across was, of course, most of our carers were over 70 or in their 70s. And you know, this is not an unfamiliar theme to all of us, but you know, I suspect that a lot of that activity just kind of disappeared. And I just wondered whether anybody actually had any stories about that, or any bright spots where perhaps, you know, somebody somehow managed to go the extra mile and get their care meetings in. I don't know whether we have any bright spot good news out of this or not. Hopefully we do. Stunned silence.
Andrew or Tony, do you want to reply first? I don't want to jump in straight away.
Well, okay. I think our care group has met, I think, twice in we call it social distancing to look at how we're getting on. The problem we've come up with, of course, is one of if we know people that we know, we don't know the ones we don't know, and the communication problem. Where, for example, I was trying to ring round parishioners as far as I could, but of course, if the phone number is wrong, or they're not in our books, or if they're not online, it's quite difficult to communicate. And so one's always worried about people we don't know about. I think we're pretty much all right with those on our list of people we're concerned about, but not so it must be so many more we just don't know about.
Yeah. Richard, did you want to
Yeah,
add something?
I am very blessed to be part of St Giles and St George's with the resources and the scale that it's been blessed to have, the generosity of the generations and people on this call. So as a result, we have been able, using people on this call, we have a larger team and it's more representative of the ages. I am very grateful and humbled by the commitment of so many men and women to make the telephone calls and have had the heart and the time to do that. I gave up counting the number of calls that our church has been able to make, that people have responded to. I am also very blessed that in our church we have people who have worked on particular areas, and they've shown extraordinary acts of kindnesses that we've been able to offer, like monthly cards or gifts or those other helplands. The food bank, and I think one of the challenges has been is broadcasting those stories without appearing to boast, because as you communicate those stories, they give hope, they nurture faith, and also they encourage others, frankly, to keep going. Understandably, quite a few people have stepped down for various reasons. That's absolutely fine, but it's encouraged other people to come forward. And we had the challenge in the early days of more people wanting to help than we actually had need for. And then how do you sort of manage that? Now, we're in the long haul, so I hope people are being helped. And it's trying to, and also the national church compared to Ashtead Baptist and St Michael's is, by the fact that we're the Anglican church, we get referrals, and a credit to the team over many years. So we still are getting referrals from the health services, from CVS. I was doing one last week. So people are being referred to us. And so that's a distinct advantage that we have to help. So the team, and I mean, it's a large team of so many people, of which I am one member. We have, I don't think, has been as busy as I can ever remember. And the other thing that we've just started to do is that we're sort of delivering gifts, having spoken with Epsom Hospital and the other hospitals in our context in the vaccination centre. We're taking them monthly gifts. So they're very busy, you know, the people in the health and the key workers. So I made some calls a couple of weeks ago, to just quietly, what is it that you might help, if anything, and as well as prayer. And so I credit to the parish of Ashtead. So we are now delivering on a monthly basis individually wrapped cakes or individual drinks, or there's individual energy bars, and they're going up just to resource people in the vaccination centre, in the ambulance station, in St Stephen's House, and actually medical practice. And so that's helping people, you know.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Good to hear. Any more on that topic? I have to keep flipping backwards and forwards. Little, are you raising your hand? Hang on. We need to unmute you.
Right. I've listened to all the doom and gloom this morning,
Oh,
and I refer people to a story in my paper today of the villages of Byam in Derbyshire, who were practically wiped out by the plague in the 1600s. But they fought back. One woman locked herself in her house with all her children, but somehow it got to them and she lost all her children, but she kept going. And now when it was time to unlock, shall we say, she came out, and I don't know any more than that, other than there are still descendants of the plague of Byam in the village today. And if you ever get a chance to go up there, go round and see it. That's my lot.
okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? Martin Hiley. Hold on a second. Martin. You need to unmute, Martin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Little. Little, I just wanted to reassure you, I find this morning not in any way distressing, but fully optimistic. So many things, so many constructive ideas and reports of activity and growth rather than shrinking in our churches and our fellowships. And I'm just very excited that our men's breakfast has had a new life coming online like this. And I look forward to new life in other areas as we change. And we don't try and go back to where we were, because we just have to make the best of where we are and look to the future, not look back.
Well, I think we look forward to bacon sandwiches and physical meetings. I get your sentiment, Martin. Do we have any more questions or thoughts? It doesn't have to be a question, just what people think, I think is kind of interesting as well, things that are bothering them. I think we might just about be done.
Got one there, Teddy Tottenham. Hand up.
Hang on, I'm looking for Teddy.
His hand is waving, so.
I'll find you, Teddy. Just keep waving at me.
Okay.
Ah,
Hey.
you've gone from bottom right on screen 2 to top left on screen 1, so that's why I couldn't find you. Oh, I've muted. I think I've muted you accidentally in the excitement.
Right, I've unmuted myself.
Excellent.
No, the reason I've been moving around your screen is because I've got cramp, so I thought I'd better get up. It happens all the time on Zoom, I find.
Me too.
Just a philosophical question, really, and it's not one perhaps that lends itself to an easy answer, but ever since biblical times, things like this have been attributed to the direct intervention of God in the world of humanity. God is punishing us by sending us this thing. And if God is punishing us, we can do things to get ourselves out of it. And even if he's not punishing us, we need his help to get out of it. And I wonder how much credence is attributed to that. Or is it the case, more the case perhaps, that God doesn't intervene directly in that sense, but he works through us, he works through human beings, and therefore the way in which he's helping us out of this is through assisting those who are doing the research into vaccines. He's assisting people in the way they're coping with all the problems that have come. So he helps on an individual basis. I mean, that seems to me to be a legitimate and hopeful way of looking at it, rather than sitting here and waiting to be whopped or lifted out by the hand of God. I don't know.
Who would like to take that one on? Richard, you're leaning forward.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just very briefly, thank you. I would refer you and everyone on this call to N.T. Wright's book, God in the Pandemic. It's a very easy read. It's 120 pages. It's about 4.99. Tom Wright is an outstanding theologian, but writes in a way that we can all understand. And his writing is called God and the Pandemic by N.T. Wright. Whatever you are. In answer to the question is, as Andrew said, I do not believe this is judgment. I think God is allowing this as part of his sovereign will to reform and reshape us. I think we look to the Exodus for what God was doing with his people in the Exodus. And in answer to your question, Teddy, you're referring to, that as part of that, we're called to look to God, to look inwards of ourselves, look up to him, reflect on that, and to see how God is wanting to mold and shape us. But also, as you say, Teddy, I believe that God is bringing his formation and reshaping in and through us as we grow in his image and character. So it's a blend of things. But as you say, it's a far deeper question than 2 minutes from me or far brighter minds than mine could give.
Okay, do we have any more thoughts on that topic? Okay, or any more questions? I'm just scanning around to see if anyone... I don't see any more hands raised. I think that might just about be it. So Colin.
There's that usual phrase, it's God's permissive will rather than his active will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we'll end question time there. One of the tasks that I have each month is to actually find somebody to give a word of thanks, and I dithered too long, to the point where it was too late to ask anybody else, so I'm doing it myself. But then I thought, well, this is actually quite propitious, because I've had perhaps a slightly unusual time during the pandemic, which could be looked at possibly as a microcosm of what everybody else has been suffering. So there've been the gloomy bits. So I won't harp on those too long, being locked in and what have you. But definitely the most important thing that's happened to me is that I've become a grandfather. I've become a grandfather twice over. I have two granddaughters, both born in the lockdowns. And these have been wonderfully life-affirming events. And they've enriched our life, and they enrich our week as we go on. Just thinking about the business of internet services that I raised earlier, we have our own little internet services, if you like, with our families, and it's more or less the only time we get to see our granddaughters, and we can't feel them or touch them. So it's very similar in a way to the experience that we have with going to an internet mass. But what we also see is, in these sort of difficult times, we see our children. I tell you, it is a strange thing to see your child with their child for the first time. And we see our children who, despite the rigours of lockdown, are endlessly patient with their children. You know, children who cry and have to be continually fed and changed and what have you. And despite all the things that we may worry about, you know, the future of the church, and, you know, is the younger generation going to step up? It does give me hope that there is a future after all this is finished. So really, I'm not sure that's much to do with saying thank you, but I just thought I'd say it. So what I'm going to do now is just say thank you. Thank you to Richard, Andrew and Father Tony for coming this morning and speaking to us and leading us through this and providing us with their guidance as they always do. And thank you to all of you for turning up. We've actually got, I think, probably our best audience for some months. We're over 30, which is great. So it's lovely to see you here all this morning. Thanks again. And that's it. I think at this stage I'll end the session.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again in March, hopefully. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very
Bye,
much, Bill.
everybody.
Thank you, friends. Every blessing to you and your loved ones.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good day. God bless.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye to everyone.
Bye.